One of the most astonishing facts concerning the interior decoration of the Broumov Library is its harmonious aesthetic consistency. The warm colors of the pavement, the noble and unobtrusive bookshelves in combination with the green columns supporting the gallery, the fresco of the ceiling painted in warm tones. It may be surprising that this architectural harmony was not the result of a single artistic effort, but created in different decades, a fact that caused an amazing particularity in iconological terms, the very special capacity of artistic media to put into words the conviction and firm beliefs of a historic society. First of all, we have to take a look at the position of the library within the context of the home building. The monastery of Broumov, realized by the architectural genius Kilian Ignaz Dientzenhofer in the years from 1727 to 1733, seems to typify one of the most ideal cases of a Baroque monastery. Although the architect had to face several kinds of economic restraint, he was able to find simple but effective solutions to the expectations of his commissioners and the public. That, in the 18th century, may be mainly defined as the group of visitors formed by members of the nobility and clergy. The position of the library above the refectory follows a traditional topos. The Lehmann catalogue of Baroque monastic libraries lists 30 similar cases in Central Europe. The correspondence of food for the mind and food for the body is here explicitly communicated by means of architecture. A more refined meaning can be found within the architectural presentation of the library within the structure of the monastery's facade. On the main frontispiece, oriented towards the garden, the library is emphasized by risalit repeating the outward appearance of the main hall, dedicated to the abbot and the secular guests of the monastery. This equivalence of the monastic sphere and the official responsibilities concerning official representation seems to be a solution up to date. While the library of the Austrian Abbey of Göttweg expresses the importance of literal study by exponing it as the architectural climax of the convent, the nearby situated Benedictine Abbey of Melk decided on another solution. Its library is situated at the end, not the center of the convent, reflecting the outer appearance of the festival hall. The reason for this aesthetic decision was, as can be supposed, the newly raised need to open the libraries to visitors, a desire spreadingly notable by the second decade of 18th century. From this time on, the monastic libraries, formerly dedicated to the secluded studies of the monks as part of the inaccessible cloister, were about to be interpreted as spaces of representation, not of some sort of secular power, but of a supposed importance of wisdom and science for the monastic community. The absolute restriction on and access to the library in monasteries of female orders may be the reason why we cannot find any example of Baroque opulence in this context, quite in contrast to the hundreds of Baroque libraries for male convents. So Dientzenhofer followed some sort of similar ideas in his Broumov project as in Melk, underlining the importance of the library as counterpart of the festival hall. Starting from a traditional convention, putting the library together with the refectory underneath, he enriched the architectural language by confronting the guest space with the library that instead of the church had to present the monks' community. Pleasures of studies were made equivalent to the pleasures of festival occasions. Dientzenhofer's conception of the library in Broumov made the ceiling fresco the main item of the iconological concept. Probably due to economic points of view, no extended sculptor's work, besides the ornamental stucco, was necessary. The most unusual and problematic topic of the fresco may be its highly oblong format. The solution that the painter Jan Karel Kovács found was to divide the ceiling into 3 sequences. These modules of the composition accompany the visitor when roaming about through the library. The first and central motive, God, Father and the Holy Spirit, is correctly visible from the entrance of the room. The inscription, Ipsum audite, this is my beloved Son, hear him, can be regarded as the key motto to understand the meaning of the entire fresco. The direction of the composition is subsequently changed, so the spectator has to turn around to read the images correctly. The first scene shows 12-year-old Jesus in the Temple of Jerusalem speaking to the elder. The second scene shows the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor, with Moses and Elias appearing to proclaim the messianity of Christ. Kovář's conception from around 1738 reveals strong influences of other Bohemian painters dating back to the 1720s. Namely, it is Johann Hebel's fresco for the Clementinum in Prague, as well as Wenzel Lorenz Reiner's fresco for the Carthusians in Gaming, that had strong effects on the fresco in Broumov. The idea of introducing an illusionistic architecture with a dome and monumental arches can be comparably found in Reiner's cupola for Gaming. Even the monochrome figures in the spandrels derive from Reiner's masterpiece. The scene of the Transfiguration of Christ, on the other hand, had already been used by Johann Hebel in his work for the Jesuits in Prague. The revelation of Christ's divine nature is here forming the climax of a concept of wisdom, insufficiently starting in the antiques and leading to the light of divine wisdom personified in the Messiah. What is definitely new in Kovář's work is the conspicuous lack of angels and putti that makes the scene almost a sober illustration of the biblical text. No allegories or personifications are commenting the scenes, as Stroger used them in the same year for his fresco in Geras. Kovář's fresco is not the anticipation of enlightened products as the engravings for Cartier's modern translation of the Vulgata from 1762, where the illustrations refrain from any supernatural character. At least the painting shows a strong but not totally consequent strategy of avoiding visual arguments, like the heavenly glory, that are not based on the fundament of the biblical tradition. In this point of view, not within the old-fashioned artistic language of Kovář, the Broumov fresco is evidence of a changing cultural climate within the monasteries in the first half of 18th century, leaving behind the self-confidence of the Counter-Reformation. Due to static problems in 1793, the library had to be restored for the first time. To protect the gallery, that in its original form had been realized without any vertical elements supporting the structure, wooden columns of the Doric order were integrated into the library, gravely changing the former floating impression of Dientzenhofer's architecture. In one go, the shelves of the library were transformed to classicistic taste. The original painted decoration preserved at the hidden backs of several shelves of the gallery consisted of painted golden acanthus leaves on white ground. The new decoration of the shelves shows illusionistic ornament combined with allegories of virtues that seem to be inspired by book illustrations, even though the precise models, some sort of edition of Cesare Ripa from the late 16th and early 17th century, cannot be identified. The most engaging idea of the intervention is the series of portraits that was inserted into the gallery's balustrade. Although the tradition of an abbot's gallery can be found all over the European monasteries by the 17th century, there's hardly any example of a systematic portrait series of the members of a convent. The votive picture of the Premonstrate convent of Rockenburg in Germany, painted less than 30 years before the gallery in Broumov was remade, shows the abbot and his brethren in front of the Madonna and the patron saints of the order. The typical Baroque aspects of this image are, first, a strict hierarchical order, mainly justified by the age of the shown clergyman. Second, a more or less natural relationship between the terrestrial and the transcendental sphere. It is easy to explain that the gallery in Broumov represents a very different kind of group portrait. The single individuals are separated from one another, all of them being characterized by noble and friendly faces. No hierarchic system can be found. The young monk is situated next to an elderly brother. This lack of hierarchy is especially notable as it was founded in the rule of Saint Benedict. But even the Holy Patriarch says in chapter 63 that age can never be the main reason for the relationship between the monks. The noble features of the portrait are, of course, a strong argument in the critics on religious houses at the end of 18th century. The parallelism to ideas of Caspar Lavater, by the way, is not occasionally in Broumov. Abbot Stefan Rautenstrauch was subscript of Lavater's work. The edition of his publication is still preserved in Broumov. By chance, the last monumental fresco of Franz Anton Maulberg, the ceiling for the Premonstrate Library in Strahov, was painted in the very same year 1793, when the portrait gallery was made for Broumov. Old Maulberg repeated an older fresco that he had done for the first time for Loka Klosterbruck some decades before. Even though the Strahov painting is part of one of the most magnificent interiors of a monastic library, we have to stress that its language is much more weaker than the simple solution in Broumov. The garrulous concept, with incomprehensible crowds of allegorical figures, had to be explained by printed concept, as the audience of those days was no longer willing to read the complicated rhetorical constructions just by means of painting. The modest images in Broumov instead try to evoke a positive idea of monastic life, represented by reasonable characters. It is no longer the church and its stalls that is regarded as the main space for the monk, as it was in the Middle Ages. It is the library, place of study and science, that is more suitable for representing the importance of monastic retreat. With this subtle iconologia, the simple Broumov decoration seems more modern than the old-fashioned allegory in Strahov. One part of the rhetoric language of Broumov Library has to remain hypothetic. The fresco by Kovács perhaps is not the initial idea for decorating the room. Although we have no documented changes in the genesis of the library, as nearly all the historical documentation is lost, there is reason to consider that one of the most excellent sketches by Wenzel Lorenz Rainer, nowadays preserved in the National Gallery in Prague, was originally invented for Broumov. Even if there can be no definite evidence that Rainer's masterpiece was meant for Dinsenhof's architecture in Broumov, it must at least have been some sort of architectural twin that the Pozzetto was made for. A few years ago, the Pozzetto was hypothetically connected to the Library of Brzeznov. A realization under these conditions, beside other arguments denying a direct association, would have meant a renunciation of a central axis, what means that the illusionistic architecture could never have been read correctly and with great effect, degrading the figures to a measure of beyond 1 meter, an artistic approach completely contradicting every habitude of Baroque monumental wall painting. A more convincing solution can be found if the Pozzetto is put together with the library in Broumov. The reconstruction shows the great talent of Rainer, reacting to the special situation of the space. Here, the figures of church and justice would amazingly rise up, an illusionism of delicate virtuosity. No doubt, if this had ever been realized, it would have opened up totally new perspectives for Bohemian Baroque painting.